Good evening, everybody. If we could have you take your seats and give us just a minute of your attention. Well, it's actually going to be more than a minute, but that's okay. So, J.J. Bollins and I welcome you to the 2019 Survivorship event, and we want you all to give yourself a round of applause for being here. And we want you to give a round of applause to all the nurses, nurse practitioners, PharmDs, social workers, everybody. And finally, a round of applause to your caregivers who, without them, so, many of you may not remember, a year ago we had the great pleasure of recruiting and bringing to our pediatric program the one and only J.J. Bollins, who had the difficult task of filling the shoes of our beloved Richard O'Reilly, who I think today was unable to join us, but who sends his regards for all of you. Everybody, he is the heart and soul of this program. He started it more than, we're not gonna say how many years ago. I'm gonna say I've been here 10 years, and every year we do this, it's always a great pleasure to host and do it. Moving forward now, it'll be JJ and I who will be hosting this show for all of you. And these are the numbers. So, you know, we had our largest year, 500 adult transplants, almost 40 pediatric transplants. We started the CAR T cells. But we want to talk to you a little bit about the future. JJ.
Thanks, Sergio, for this nice introduction. And welcome also on behalf of the pediatric group. It has been over a year now, and I was on the stage last year, about a month after I arrived here in the US. Now it has been over a year. And I came with a mission to continue to deliver excellent care at MSKCC, but also to create an innovative future to improve the survival chances of the pediatric BMT patients. And not only the survival, but also the well-being. Remember, the survival of the last 4 decades has improved significantly, from less than 10% in the 70s to nowadays 60, 70% survival. That's fantastic news, of course, but it also illustrates that there is still a medical need, because more than 30% is not surviving. So in the upcoming couple of minutes, I'm going to present a couple of initiatives we are working on here at MSK, adults and peds together, to improve the survival chances as well as the well-being. Because remember, survival is of course initially the most important endpoint, but we also would like to have a high quality of life. And remember, some of the long-term survivors still face residual disease or disease burden that can complicate day-to-day life. Having said this, I would like to introduce the 2 initiatives we are working on. It's precision drug dosing and gene therapy and increased survivorship. So let me introduce and explain a little bit more about the precision dosing. As one size does not fit all, also one drug dose usually does not fit all. And I would like to illustrate that in these 3 survival curves. And these survival curves illustrate you that on the x-axis, for those who are not familiar, it's the time after transplant. On the y-axis is the survival. The higher the curve, the higher survival. And the difference in survival is just the difference of drug levels. So it's the same drug, it's the same kind of patient, and the only difference is the difference in drug exposure. So why is this? So all the patients, you here in this room, may all react different to the drug we give you during the conditioning regimen prior to transplant. And to prevent this, we started to measure, and this is MSK researchers who have shown these results, by measuring the drug levels while we do the drug dosing. We found that some of the patients had 10 times higher drug levels than others who had lower levels. By finding the sweet spot, we were able to identify the highest survivals. The patients who had higher drug levels tend to have more complications and were more likely to die because of the complications, while those who had lower levels tend to die more frequently because of relapse. MSK researchers have shown over the last couple of years to identify the sweet spot, and we would like to continue this work by further improving survival, because apparently also overdosing of the drugs or higher drug levels was also complicated by more late effects. So let me summarize this initiative. So there are still remaining needs. On the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you can appreciate that there is significant survival, but there is also patients who face quality of life issues by measuring drug levels, but also by measuring other variables that are important to predict survival after. We will be able to increase the survival with a better quality of life. So that's the goal on the right-hand side in the upcoming 2 to 3 years. And let me finish with this last slide.
You know this well, right?
This is, so although we have to realize that BMT and cell therapy and gene therapy is a very complicated procedure, but we really have to try to make it as simple as possible. And by measuring the drug levels, we have to try to harmonize the treatment for all the patients, aiming to improve survival and improve the quality of life of all the survivors long term, not only 2 to 3 years, but decades. With this, I would like to hand over the mic again to Dr. Gerald Sergio, who is going to introduce you the second initiative, but not before thanking all the patients and families and nurse practitioners, the nursing, ancillary services, etc. And I'm really looking forward to work with you in the upcoming years here at MSK. Sergio, the mic is yours.
So what you see there is actually a graph of the ages of patients we've been transplanting over the last 10 years. And what's incredible to me is that the number of patients over the age of 60 and over the age of 70 is increasing dramatically. We have developed a special relationship with our geriatricians and our survivorship nurses, and have started to figure out that our survivorship clinic, which is an essential component of healthy living post-transplant, needs to expand. And we really need to start serving the needs of patients who were transplanted when they were 60, and patients who are now getting to their 6th and 7th decade of life, having had a transplant 20 or 30 years ago. And we really think that there are now ways that we can help our patients, we can help you age in a much more healthier fashion, maintain your independence to a much greater level, and learn in the process. We have called this process Healthy Aging Post-Transplant, and it's one of our next big initiatives over the next couple of years, together with our geriatric people, our nursing survivorship program, and together with you. Now, we just showcased 2 programs. We are actually moving next year, and this is the MSK Koch Center that will be on 74th Street. The adult BMT service is moving there, all the outpatient programs moving there, and the academic offices. M7 and M8, the inpatient units, will stay in main campus. This will be a state-of-the-art facility where we are trying to make the transplant journey easier. Now, I get called and asked, how can we help? Every little bit helps And we know we get research funding from grants, we get research funding from pharmaceuticals, but we also get research funding from philanthropy, from people like you and like people outside. Every little bit helps to help with the research enterprise. At the back of the door, there are colleagues from the development office. Feel free to ask questions. There's material there. If anything, again, every little bit helps. It will be used for programs that both JJ and I are developing together, 2 of them which we showcased today. And these are just many of the ways you can help. JJ?
Thanks, Sergio. And I would like to end this part of the, let's say, presentation by introducing Dr. Papadopoulos from MSK Adult Program. She has a long history here. She's an outstanding BMT physician, and she is going to introduce one of her, let's say, patients for who she took care over the last couple of years. Essie, first.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. It's always wonderful for the docs to see all of our patients who have been through what all of you have been through in a celebratory mode as opposed to a patient-doctor mode. It is my great pleasure tonight to give you a little bit of an introduction on Peter Hamburger. We met back in 2012. I very, very clearly remember the day that Dr. Joseph Jersic, some of you in the audience may even know him or remember him. He was one of our senior leukemia doctors here back then. And he called me up and he said, I'd like to refer a patient to you. He has AML. We discussed the reasons why he would need a transplant. He needed an unrelated transplant. And he said, wonderful guy, wonderful family. There's only one thing. You'll never get a word in edgewise. Now, Joe and I have been very good friends for 30 years, basically, and he really underestimated my ability to get a few words in at the opportune moment. Peter is one of the most single-minded, focused patients I have ever taken care of. And it became very obvious when, after having a pretty good post-transplant course for the first couple of years, he unfortunately developed a significant complication that landed him in the hospital for a few months. And it was never a moment that he wasn't focused and planning to get out there, get better, back to his family, back to work, and all of that came to be. It is actually my pleasure to say that after 7 years of knowing Peter and his wife Joy, that I can transition him from patient to friends. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Peter Hamburger.
A lot of people out there. First of all, I want you all to know that the second go-around at Sloan Kettering had nothing to do with cancer. I got a rare tick bite called ehrlichiosis, and I discovered it after I had played golf with friends, and I got an eagle hitting a ball 220 yards. That's just the precursor. Now I'll try and talk. For me, life is, in the words of the Beatles, a magical mystery tour. From the time we take our first breath to the time we take our last breath, we are all on an adventure filled with joy, disappointments, and mysteries which await us at every turn. Growing up for most of us is a happy, loving experience with friends and family. There isn't much for us to think about when we're young because we're out there playing with our friends, having to listen to our parents, unfortunately, tell us to do our homework, clean up our rooms, and eat food that we don't like. Then, of course, there is the great bonus that none of us have now, which is, we're not aware of it at the time, we don't have to pay any bills. Some of us are more active, like I am, and if it was up to my wife, she would do what I'm going to tell you. She would put me in the bad boy seat about 4 or 5 times a week. But that's my punishment. As we grow up, we see that life isn't quite as simple as we thought it was. There are small hurdles for us to overcome. There are medium hurdles to overcome. And then there are those huge hurdles, which are like climbing Mount Everest to overcome. Close your eyes for a moment if you can. And now think about what it was like to be a soldier charging on the beaches of Normandy. Think about all the people who were persecuted for centuries and centuries. Think about Africans who were torn from their homes and brought to what became the United States as slaves. And now think about your forefathers who left their homes around the world, came to the United States with very little money or nothing, and created homes for themselves and for us. And then, more importantly, now think about the time, the moment you heard that you had cancer. The very first thing I did when I heard that, like most of you, you probably said, why me? Why am I the person who has this evil disease? I quickly put that aside and I said, the hell with it. I've got cancer, but I have more important things to do. I have to be positive, I have to be strong, and I have to be the center for my friends and my family. Because we are the strengths when people go through cancer. We bring people up, we bring people down. The most difficult thing for me was after I discovered this from my doctor, was having to tell my wife, my family, and my friends. Because I'm sure you all realize that when you have that word cancer, there's a stigma attached to it, and you're just not sure how anyone is going to respond to you. This became what I call my moment of truth in my journey. And what I discovered was, I want to take a few minutes to go through with you what I went through. My thinking is there are 2 key concepts which I always urge anyone who has cancer to think about and to embrace. These are 2 of the most important concepts for me in my life. One is positive attitude, and the other is setting goals. When I was admitted to Sloan Kettering, and I assume you all had this happen to you too, you get into your room, and within the next day or 2, they give you, I called it a little red book, and I was going to say, my wife said, don't do it. It wasn't Mal's red book, but it was a red book that they said, please read. So, being curious, I opened the page, and after like 3 minutes, I said, I'm done with this. And the doctor and the nurse looked at me and they said, why? And immediately my wife, Joy, who's over there, she took the book because she was going to read it. I said, I'm not going to read this book. There is not one thing that's positive in this book. This book is telling you every damn thing that can go wrong with you. And I share this with you, and maybe I shouldn't. I said, look, I have cancer. What's the worst that can happen? I could die. I don't need any information from anybody that's going to bring me down. I only want information that is positive, exhilarating, etc. We don't need that. None of us do. Because whatever comes, comes, and so be it. But we need to be ahead. When I got there, one of the other things that the doctors said and the nurses, they said, you know, you got this corridor. We want you to get out there, walk 2 or 3 times a day, go around that corridor 15 times. I said, okay. And as many of you know, those corridors aren't particularly beautiful, you know, everything's sort of yucky. You have nice paintings on the wall, but it's yucky. So I decided this was going to be my gym. And fortunately, I'm going to show my age. You all had these things, not anymore. I had an iPod, which we all know is no more, but fortunately we are. And on my iPod, I had all my jazz, rock and roll, and classical music. So I said, I'm going to kick this thing. So with the stupid stroller that you had, with, as you all know, with the chemotherapy dripping down into you, 4 times a day I would walk, do it 40 times. I would go each time 40 times and listen to music, and it was really very rewarding. I mean, listening to great jazz, John Coltrane, Beethoven, the Beatles, because I mentioned their names. This was really a wonderful experience. Now, I crossed out something, but I'm going to say it in any case. Many of the other people who were there with me, unfortunately, didn't have an iPod. No, it's funny, but it's not funny. So you see people walking around, and it's sad. It's not really funny. It's almost like if back then, if Sloan Kettering could give everybody an iPod, it would have been better. So I would stop. As you can see, I like to talk. And I would chit-chat with these people. I would try and make them laugh. And then when I was done with my iPod, I would give my iPod to whoever was there who was walking and said, here, use my iPod. When you're done, bring it back. And I have to admit, it made me almost as happy as it made them. Their sullen faces lit up. They walked at a faster pace, and I felt I actually did something for people. Now, one of the most important group of people that you really need to care about, because they care about you, and I think they're all over there, all the nurses, the nurse practitioners. Now, you're all clapping for them, but that wasn't what I wanted you to do. They would come into my room, and I felt it was my responsibility to make them happy. People don't realize it. They think that doctors and nurses, the people who feed you, they're insulated and they're strong because they see sick people all the time. But they're human beings just like us, and they deserve to have the smiles and to make them happy. So when they would come in, the first thing I would say, okay, what do you want to listen to? And they each would put on different music. And then I discovered that, because I like to talk, I'm sorry, it's going on for more than 5 minutes. I would get to know them, and I discovered that many of them like to cook. Well, the name is hamburger, of course, so you have to take that into consideration. And many years ago, I actually gave cooking lessons while I was floating around not knowing what I wanted to do, and that was after 5 years of graduate school, and it was really pissing my parents off. But between myself and my wife, Joy, who's written 2 cookbooks, what I started to do was to give them recipes. That was a problem for them in the end, because you can see I'm an annoying person, And when they would come in, I would say to them, I said, okay, have you cooked the damn meal yet? And they said no, and it just kept coming in. So eventually I had no more nurse practitioners because nobody wanted to see me. But it was a very rewarding experience working with them and watching them get happy, too. Attitude, which is what I've been trying to talk about, is extremely, it's a very strong drug. Dr. P would agree with me on this. It can do wonderful things that medical drugs can't do. I sort of believe that I was able to get through all of this, not just because of the care and not just because of the medicine, it was because of my attitude. Trying to be healthy mentally and trying to be as well as we can be physically makes a huge difference in our being, whether we're in a hospital or we're at home. Let me see. Oh, let me see where I am. Oh, I passed that already. A key question for me was, how do you keep up with your identity in the hospital? And by that I mean, there was no way I was going to wear one of those hospital garments and risk looking like Jack Nicholson in Something's Gotta Give. Thanks to the creativity of my wife, Joy, she designed clothes for me, so to speak. She would take outerwear and cut it here and here so that I could put it on and it wouldn't affect the port. In addition to which I had, shorts. And you all understand it's really important. I wish more people did that because that's creating your identity. When you're in the hospital, I wish I was Jack Nicholson because, then I would be with Diane Keaton in the movie. But you lose your identity wearing what everyone else is wearing. And I think it's a very important thing for us to do, and it really helped me. Setting goals, which goes with, being positive, is the second foundation for me and was extremely important during those weeks when I was at Sloan Kettering. We can all agree that as great as a hospital is, as wonderful as all our caretakers are, and as supportive as our family and friends are, spending weeks in a hospital isn't exactly the most mentally stimulating experience we have had. This is why setting goals for myself was, in part, key to me not going crazy, staying positive, and maintaining a happy balance for everyone, not just myself. In addition to which, setting goals to me was like, okay, I'm in retirement now. What would I do in retirement in a hospital? Well, this is what a typical day was for me every day. I would wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would do my first walk through the corridor, 40 times, while listening to music, of course. Then I would have breakfast, read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and speak to Joy, and perhaps even get my daughter Zoe or my son on the phone who would speak to me for like 5 minutes. I gotta go. Then I would turn on my music again, and I do like to read. I would spend 2 hours reading either a novel or a book, and I would do this all the time. In fact, in the 6 to 8 weeks that I was in total in Sloan Kettering, plus the other 4 to 5 months that I had to stay home before I went back to work, I read over 80 books. In fact, that other time that I got sick, I read another 85 books. So it was pretty good. After reading a book, I take a shower, put on the Joy hamburger outfits to prepare for when Joy would arrive, which would be at 11 o'clock. And then we would get into an active, serious match of playing backgammon, in which she'll tell you she wins 70% of the time, and she's probably right. One of the most important things that Joy did for me is she was a true champ, because as much as everybody says Sloan Kettering's food's good, let me tell you, after a while it's not so good, and if you ask for a soft-boiled egg, it comes in as hard as a rock. But she was a true champ, because she would always bring me my lunch and dinner. And this was, this made me feel good, being a hamburger. After she would leave, I would do another 40 laps. Then friends might come in, and then there was another 2 hours of book reading. And before that, the afternoon passed. I watched television, had dinner, and then one more lap of 40. This was a typical structured day for me, and it made me feel like that I was reaching goals every day. If I did it, it was a goal. I was extremely lucky at the hospital. Each of the 3 times I was admitted for a different stage in curing the AML, everything went well with no real bumps in the road. This continued. Now we get Dr. P in here. After Dr. P said I could go home and the successful stem cell replacement had worked. For the months which followed, all my visits to the hospital to be with Dr. P and listening to her high heels click-clack to meet with me, telling me that I was doing great, was an important event for both Joy and myself. In the end, though, and this is true, there were 4 more goals for me to conquer. These were really critical. 1, when could I have my first fried egg with a runny yolk? 2, when can I have a medium rare hamburger? 3, when can I have those raw oysters? And 4, when can I have that steak tartare? As you can tell, these were very high, lofty goals for me. Fortunately, the eggs and the hamburgers were easy to nail down within 8 months of the successful stem cell. It was the oysters and the steak tartare which proved elusive to me. Every year, Dr. P would get that stupid call from me. Hi, Dr. P, can I have the oysters or steak tartare yet? And every damn year, the answer would be no. This year, the same call came from me. Any change now, Dr. P? This time the answer was, Peter, I have a different answer. Your immune system is now 100%, and as such, I can't hold you back anymore. She sounded happy for me, but knew I would make up for all those lost times. The one thing which has been out of my control was now another hurdle I had overcome, and my magical mystery tour could continue. To celebrate this event, over a period of 12 days, one vacation last month at the end of Long Island, I would have before dinner a dozen oysters on the half shell, a large vodka with a slice of orange, and one night after that, I followed it up with my preparation of steak tartare. By my account, during that 12-day period, this boy consumed over 96 oysters. This then was my journey. Excuse me. It was and remains a great magical mystery tour for me. Keeping a great attitude and setting goals were and remain the great inspirations of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So continuing the nutrition point, I want to point out that on the left, our nutrition services are there, and they'll explain the reason why Peter could not have oysters and steak tartare until the moment Dr. P allowed him. I would now like to call Dr. Brian Schaefer to present our next patient. Brian.
Thank you very much. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome our next guest, Hill Carl Otto. He's a 22-year veteran of the Nassau County Police Department. Like me, he's a proud family man, and since 2016, he's been a patient of mine, at which time he underwent a haploidentical bone marrow transplant. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term haploidentical, that's a half-match donor, typically from a family member, a child, or a sibling, or parents. In this case, it was his brother Spitz. And I'll let Hill talk to you about that experience. But for me, I just want to comment on one anecdote that I thought of when he agreed to come speak for us today. And as a doctor, it's one of the great pleasures to watch patients really thrive after transplant. That's, of course, the purpose of this gathering. And I especially take pleasure watching patients exceed at the various athletic or sporting events that they were doing before they came for the transplant. And I could think of a day in clinic, this might have been like about 2 months after the transplant. Hill came and he said, I really want to get back to weight training. You see, his job requires a certain amount of physical fitness, and he wanted to be ready to get back. And that's the kind of guy that Hill is. Even when he's not feeling his best, he was always thinking about sort of other people. How can I be a better person, a better police officer, a better family man? And what Hill didn't realize is that I have a little unspoken rule in my clinic, and this is true for all the patients. Now, of course, as a doctor, I encourage you to excel at athletic activities or different sporting events, but if you exceed me, you can never tell me about this. You have to keep that a secret. Now, I remember in that moment, I remember thinking two things. The first was that all of the anxiety that I had built up inside about, is this transplant going to work? We laid the best plans, we execute the transplant as best we can, but there's some component of it that is always, we have to wait and see how it will go. Will the donor and you get along? And I remember in that moment thinking that this transplant is going to turn out all right. It's going to be okay. The second thing I remember thinking is that, he's going to come walking into my clinic looking like he does now, and everybody's going to know who's been to the gym and who hasn't been to the gym. He's going to break my rule. But I tell you, the relationship between really all healthcare providers and patients is a two-way street. And I learn a lot from watching the patients go through their experience, and I've learned a lot from you, Hill. And it's really about staying poised under adversity and thinking about how to give back to your community and be a better family man and really to thrive after this. And that's what I think of as a definition of success. And it's been a great pleasure of mine to watch you thrive after the transplant. And that's why I'm so glad that you agreed to come speak for us today. So with that, I'll welcome Hill Carl Otto. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm not going to be like Peter. I'm not going to take that long. Thank you again, Dr. Schaefer. On December 23rd, 2015, the day before Christmas Eve, I began a journey I never thought I would experience. In the middle of prepping for the holidays with my family, I started to notice that I had a persistent cough, chill, and a fever that would not go away for about three days. I get emotional talking about this, but bear with me. I assume it was the flu. My lovely wife, whom I've been married for 23 years, was getting worried about my condition. And on the morning of December 26, at about 5 a.m., she told me we were going to see a doctor. We're going to the emergency room. About 5 a.m., she told me to get dressed. We're going to go. It wasn't a suggestion, but an order. I wasn't really thinking much about it. I thought I was just going to go to the emergency room, get some cold medicine, and be on my way. That day, after a blood test at South Nassau Community Hospital, the hematologist sat us down and gave us the bad news. I had leukemia. That day, my life came to a stop. My wife looked at me, held my hand, and said with an angel voice, "Honey, we are going to fight this. God is good. He's not going to let us down." That's when the journey began. The doctors then sat us down and suggested that I go to South Nassau, actually North Shore Manhasset, for treatment. My wife immediately gets on her phone and started making calls. With the help of family and friends, lifelong friends from the medical field, we were referred 3 times that day to see Dr. Tallman at Sloan Kettering. Dr. Tallman started me on an aggressive treatment right away and was very optimistic about the outcome. My first round of chemo went very well, and I had minimal reaction to it. I had more anxiety about the bone marrow test than the actual chemo. After several rounds of chemo and about a month stay at the hospital, where I had met an excellent group of doctors, nurses, and recreational team who treated me like family, I was sent home awaiting a match for bone marrow transplant that Dr. Tallman had suggested. About 6 months later, after exerting all avenues in the World Bank for a full match and stem cells, my doctor decided to look to my brother, who was a half match. He suggested a haploid procedure where I would be able to get a transplant using a half match, followed by an extensive chemo. I finally felt some relief that I would be able to make a full recovery. I then went to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for a second opinion from Dr. Richard Jones. After consulting with Dr. Jones at Johns Hopkins, who previously performed this procedure multiple times, I felt confident in Sloan's team and decided to do it there. I was then introduced to Dr. Schiffer and his team. Dr. Schiffer brought me into an environment that felt like home, and his team reassured me that they would support me through this challenging time. On July 14, 2016, I received my transplant, and my nurses, they wished me a happy birthday. I never felt so much happiness from those words. From that day on, I truly felt I was born again. I felt stronger mentally, physically, and I thought I could take on the world. About 13 months later, I went back to work full duty as a Nassau County police officer, cancer-free. I want to say thank you. Thank you so much to the Sloan Kettering team, all the nurses on the leukemia floor. I want to thank you. All the nurses from the transplant floor, thank you so much. And I especially want to thank Dr. Tallman and Dr. Schaefer. Without them, I don't know. God bless you. God bless you, Doc. I love you guys. If anyone who's in this room here today who's feeling the same way that I felt that day when I was diagnosed, I just want you to know that there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel. With God, good family support, and friends, anything is possible. And we have to encourage our doctors and the scientists for their support, their love for science to take care of us. And one day, I know they'll find a cure and much more people are going to survive. Thank you. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you all, and I would like to end the evening with this great celebration. This is so important to have this celebration every year, and I would like to thank the speakers, the physicians who have introduced the survivors, and I would like to thank Sergio for hosting this.
And on behalf of both of us and all of you, we'd like to thank the MSK staff who put this together. Shayna, Chelsea, Erica, Public Affairs, Jill. Every year they do. I don't know how they do it, but every year it's better. Okay, we're already planning next year, so if you know large venues, please give us a pointers, okay? Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.